The recorder clicks every time I press the button, loud enough that I flinch before it settles into silence again. I keep expecting something outside to hear it, even though I know that's irrational. Sound carries differently now. Every noise feels like a signal flare. My name is Jack Ford. If this is ever recovered, these recordings are a record of what happened while everything fell apart. Not rumors, not broadcasts, just what one person saw and survived. When the first emergency alerts came through, the city was already past saving. Sirens layered over each other so constantly they stopped sounding urgent and became background noise. Helicopters circled low between buildings, banking sharply like pilots were searching for something they couldn't quite locate. People were still going to work. That's what I remember most. Coffee shops open. Commuters staring at phones while messages told them to remain calm and stay indoors. Nobody understood how fast things were moving. I worked maintenance in an office tower near Pioneer Square. By the time management told everyone to leave, police were already redirecting traffic away from hospitals. Crowds gathered outside emergency rooms, shouting through locked doors. Some people were bleeding. Some were screaming accusations at staff inside who refused to open up. The first violent incident I witnessed didn't look supernatural. It looked like panic. A man collapsing near a bus stop, shaking violently while strangers tried to help him. Then he grabbed one of them and bit down hard enough that the sound carried across the street. There was no warning, no hesitation, just immediate animal aggression. Everything after that accelerated. Gunshots echoed downtown within minutes. Officers shouting conflicting orders. People running without knowing where safety actually was. Rumors spread faster than information. Riots, chemical leaks, terrorism. Anything except the truth everyone was seeing with their own eyes. I walked away from the main streets because instinct said crowds were dangerous. Smoke began rising from multiple directions before noon. Traffic locked solid. Drivers abandoned cars and moved on foot, dragging luggage that slowed them down. Phones worked for a while. Messages stacked faster than they could be read. Videos circulated showing attacks in subway cars, hospitals, parking garages. Victims turning violent hours after being injured. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Transmission through bites. Rapid onset. Loss of cognition. Extreme aggression. The broadcasts finally confirmed it late in the afternoon, using clinical language that felt detached from reality. Citizens advised to isolate. Emergency services overwhelmed. Federal response mobilizing. But isolation only works before exposure. By then, the streets were already full of infected moving unpredictably through crowds. Some staggered. Others sprinted. Injuries that should have stopped a person meant nothing anymore. Pain didn't slow them. Fear didn't exist in their faces. I ducked into a hardware store when the first large wave moved through the district. Metal security gates rattled as employees dragged them halfway down. About 15 of us hid inside between shelves of tools and paint cans while pounding echoed outside. Nobody said much. A teenager cried quietly until an older man gently covered her mouth so the sound wouldn't carry. Every small noise felt dangerous. We stayed there until darkness started swallowing the windows. That's where I met the people who would become my group, though none of us called it that yet. Carla introduced herself first, a nurse who had escaped a hospital evacuation that turned violent. Her voice stayed steady even while explaining what she'd seen. Patients deteriorating within hours after bites, restraint failures, staff abandoning wards once containment collapsed. Evan came next. Construction worker. Practical, already talking about exits and transportation instead of shock. He understood immediately that waiting meant dying. Luis barely spoke. Young, maybe college age, carrying a backpack filled with textbooks he refused to abandon. His hands shook constantly, but he followed instructions without hesitation. We left together because none of us wanted to step outside alone. The city at night felt unreal. Fires burned unchecked, reflecting off glass towers. Car alarms triggered randomly, then faded as batteries died. The air smelled like smoke and hot metal. We moved through alleys, avoiding open intersections. Twice we hid while infected wandered past, drawn toward distant noise. Up close they didn't moan or shuffle the way movies taught us. They breathed hard, restless, twitching as if every muscle fired too quickly. Near midnight, we reached my truck parked several miles north of downtown. Somehow untouched. No broken windows. No blood nearby. Relief hit so hard it made my legs weak. We didn't drive immediately. Roads were too blocked, too uncertain. Instead, we locked ourselves inside and rested in shifts while distant screams echoed across the city like storms rolling through concrete valleys. Sleep didn't come easily. Every shadow looked like movement. Every memory replayed louder once things grew quiet. Morning changed everything. The noise was gone. No steady traffic hum. No sirens. Just wind moving debris along empty streets. Silence felt worse than chaos because it meant something had already finished happening. We drove north slowly, weaving around abandoned vehicles. Bodies lay where people had fallen. Some moved suddenly when the engine sound reached them, forcing Evan to accelerate while they chased briefly before losing interest. A military checkpoint blocked part of the interstate. Barricades overturned. Equipment abandoned mid-operation. Blood covered the pavement, but no soldiers remained. Whatever plan existed had failed quickly. We decided cities were lost and headed east toward the mountains. Fewer people meant fewer infected. That logic guided every choice afterward. Fuel became our constant concern. We stopped at isolated gas stations to siphon gasoline from abandoned cars. Each stop carried risk. One person working while the others stood watch with tools grabbed from the hardware store. At one station, we nearly learned too late that quiet didn't mean safe. A woman rose from behind the counter as Carla and I searched for supplies. Her movements were wrong. Too sharp, too sudden. She lunged without warning. Carla stepped forward instinctively, trained to help. I pulled her back as teeth snapped inches from her arm. Evan rushed in with a tire iron and struck the infected repeatedly until the skull finally collapsed enough to stop movement. It didn't feel like defending ourselves. It felt like crossing a line none of us could uncross. Carla washed her hands over and over afterward, even though she hadn't been touched. Nobody spoke during the drive that followed. We understood then that these weren't sick people waiting for treatment. They were already gone. The mountains gradually swallowed the sounds of civilization. Trees thickened. Roads narrowed. Smoke faded behind us. For the first time since everything began, birdsong returned, small, ordinary sounds that felt almost shocking after constant panic. We camped near a logging trail without lighting a fire. Cold crept into the truck overnight, but darkness felt safer than visibility. Sometime before dawn, the radio crackled to life with a faint emergency broadcast repeating a federal directive. A program name surfaced through static, Cinderfall protocol, acknowledging nationwide containment failure and instructing survivors to move toward rural fallback zones. No coordinates followed, just repetition and interference. Still, hope entered the truck quietly after hearing it. If the government had a fallback plan, maybe structure still existed somewhere beyond the chaos. We continued deeper into the mountains the next morning, believing distance might equal survival. That belief lasted until we heard screaming behind us on a narrow forest road. A man ran toward us through the trees, waving frantically, 3 infected closing fast behind him. We hesitated just long enough for reality to decide the outcome. They caught him before we reached the truck. The sounds followed us long after we drove away. No one argued about stopping. No one suggested turning back. That was the moment survival stopped being theoretical and became something colder. We drove until fuel forced another stop, climbing higher into wilderness where the air felt thinner and the world seemed untouched by collapse. For the first time since leaving the city, silence didn't feel temporary. It felt permanent. And somewhere during that long drive, without anyone saying it aloud, we accepted a truth none of us were ready to face. The old world wasn't coming back soon. Maybe not ever. The mountains changed the way sound behaved. Engines echoed farther. Branches snapping carried through the trees like signals. And even quiet conversation felt too loud. We began speaking in lower voices without agreeing to it, instinct replacing discussion. Roads narrowed into cracked asphalt ribbons barely maintained before everything ended. Fallen rocks forced us to stop often and clear paths by hand. Every delay made my shoulders tighten. Standing still felt dangerous now, even when nothing moved around us. Fuel dropped faster than expected climbing elevation. The truck struggled on steep grades, engine whining louder than I liked. Evan kept watching the gauge, doing silent math none of us wanted confirmed. We found an abandoned ranger station near a trailhead late in the afternoon. No vehicles outside. Doors unlocked. Papers scattered across desks as if people had left mid-conversation. Maps covered one wall, marked with evacuation routes that suddenly meant nothing. We searched carefully, room by room. No infected. That alone felt like a victory. We gathered supplies, canned food, water purification tablets, emergency blankets. Carla found a medical locker still intact and stocked what she could carry. Luis copied portions of a regional map into a notebook even though we already had one. He said writing things down helped him think. We decided to stay the night. It was the first real shelter since leaving the city. Solid walls, elevation, visibility through wide windows overlooking the valley below. For a few hours, something close to safety settled over us. We even allowed a small fire in the iron stove after sealing the windows. The warmth changed everyone's posture. Shoulders lowered. Breathing slowed. That's when Carla told us what she'd seen before escaping the hospital. Patients brought in with bite wounds deteriorated rapidly. Fever spikes, confusion, then aggression. Brain scans showed massive neurological overstimulation, like every survival instinct firing at once while higher cognition shut down. Sedatives barely worked. Restraints failed when patients ignored injuries that should have immobilized them. She said some bodies kept moving long after blood loss should have killed them. Nobody interrupted her. Facts mattered even when they hurt. The night passed without incident, but sleep came unevenly. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. I woke repeatedly expecting pounding at the doors that never came. Morning arrived wrapped in fog rolling through the trees. We listened before opening anything. Silence again. We packed quickly and continued east, following logging roads marked on the ranger maps. Civilization faded completely. No power lines, no distant smoke, just forest stretching in every direction. Around midday we encountered another group of survivors. For people walking along the road carrying backpacks and hunting rifles. They froze when they saw us, weapons raised but not aimed directly. Everyone looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, cautious. We stopped at a distance. Conversations happened slowly at first. Names exchanged without details. They had come from a smaller town that fell 2 days after the cities. Said infected moved along highways like migration routes, drawn by noise and density. One of them, an older man named Reed, warned us that military evacuation sites were collapsing. Too many civilians, screening failures, panic spreading infection faster than containment. The word overrun came up more than once. Hope shrank a little hearing that. We shared water and information but didn't merge groups. Supplies were limited. Trust came slower now. Before separating, Reed told us higher elevation helped. Fewer infected wandered that far unless driven by sound. We followed that advice. By late afternoon, the road deteriorated into gravel barely wide enough for the truck. Trees pressed close on both sides, branches scraping metal constantly. The world felt smaller, enclosed. That's when the engine temperature spiked. Steam hissed from under the hood before Evan could pull over fully. We shut everything down and waited while heat bled into the cold air. Radiator leak. Not catastrophic yet, but bad enough to threaten travel. Evan worked quietly, improvising a patch using tape, sealant, and fabric strips from an emergency kit, temporary at best. We all understood what it meant without saying it. The vehicle wouldn't last forever. Movement had a time limit now. We continued slowly, stopping often to let the engine cool. Progress became measured in miles instead of distance. Every incline felt like negotiation. Near dusk, we heard gunshots echoing far off through the forest. Single shots, controlled spacing, human survivors. We debated investigating but decided against it. Unknown people meant unknown risk. The rule forming among us was simple: avoid unnecessary contact. Night fell before we found suitable shelter. We parked near an abandoned logging turnout and slept inside the truck again, cramped but concealed beneath tree cover. Sometime deep in the night, Luis woke us. Movement on the road. Shapes passing slowly through moonlight. 6 infected drifting between trees. They didn't notice us, just wandered, twitching, occasionally jerking their heads as if listening for something distant. Up close, they looked worse than before. Skin graying, movements slightly less coordinated. Carla whispered that decomposition might eventually slow them. Months, maybe. That idea lingered long after they disappeared into the forest. Morning brought cold rain. The road turned slick, forcing slower travel. Visibility dropped to almost nothing beyond a few yards. We rounded a bend and nearly collided with a wrecked SUV blocking the path. Fresh blood streaked across the driver's door. Inside sat a woman slumped over the wheel, unmoving. We waited. No movement. Evan approached cautiously while I covered him with a crowbar we'd started carrying openly. He checked through the window, then opened the door slowly. She was dead, not turned. A bite wound marked her neck, already darkened. Carla confirmed what we feared. She died recently but hadn't reanimated yet. We backed away quickly, unsure how long transformation took outside controlled observations. While clearing the vehicle from the road, we heard rustling uphill. 3 infected emerged from the trees, drawn by our noise. They moved faster than expected on the slope. Evan shouted for us to get in the truck, but Luis slipped on wet gravel while running. 1 infected closed distance immediately, grabbing his backpack strap and pulling him backward. Everything happened too fast for thought. I swung the crowbar instinctively, striking the infected's head. The impact jarred my arms but didn't stop it. Carla stabbed downward with a hunting knife she'd taken from the ranger station, hitting the neck. Evan finished it with the tire iron. The other 2 reached us seconds later. Adrenaline erased hesitation. We fought together, coordinated without planning. Blows aimed for the skull. No wasted movement. When it ended, the rain washed blood into the dirt around our boots. Luis sat shaking against the truck, staring at the torn strap where teeth had come inches from his shoulder. Nobody spoke for several minutes. That was our first real fight. Not escape, not hiding, direct survival. We drove on afterward in silence, each of us understanding that luck had nearly run out. Late that afternoon, the radiator patch failed completely. Steam erupted again, louder this time, engine coughing before dying halfway up a steep grade. We tried restarting it. Nothing. The realization settled slowly. The truck, our protection, our speed, our escape was finished. We unloaded supplies into backpacks while the forest pressed close around us. The road ahead curved upward into thicker wilderness, unreachable by vehicle now. Everything we carried had to matter. Everything left behind became permanent loss. As we started walking uphill, leaving the truck where it died, I looked back once through the trees. It felt like abandoning the last piece of the old world that still worked. And for the first time since leaving the city, fear returned in a new form. Not panic, not shock, just the understanding that from this point forward, survival depended entirely on our own bodies, and how long they could keep moving. Walking changed everything. Inside the truck, we'd still been travelers, people passing through disaster. On foot, the world felt heavier, slower, more permanent. Every mile had weight now. Every incline demanded payment in breath and muscle. We followed the logging road upward because elevation still seemed like the only advantage left to us. The forest grew denser the higher we climbed. Trees packed so tightly sunlight barely reached the ground. Damp earth muted our footsteps, which helped, but it also meant visibility dropped to almost nothing beyond a short distance. Evan set the pace. Steady, sustainable. No rushing. He said exhaustion killed faster than hunger. By the second hour, our packs already felt too heavy. We stopped often, not because we wanted to but because we had to. Shoulders burned. Legs trembled. The reality of long-term movement settled in. This wasn't an evacuation anymore. It was relocation without a destination. Cold arrived early at elevation. Breath fogged in front of us even before sunset. Carla checked everyone constantly for signs of dehydration or shock, slipping into professional rhythm whenever stress rose too high. Luis tried to stay positive. He talked about finding ranger towers or fire lookouts, places designed for isolation. His voice sounded forced but necessary. Conversation kept fear from filling the silence completely. We reached a ridge near dusk overlooking miles of forest rolling into haze. No smoke columns, no distant traffic, just wilderness stretching endlessly. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of abandonment. We camped beneath a rock overhang that night. No fire, cold food, rotating watch shifts. Darkness in the mountains was absolute. No city glow, no distant lights, only stars sharp enough to hurt your eyes. During my watch, I heard howling far away. Not wolves, human voices carried by wind. Screaming, then abruptly cut off. The sound traveled for minutes after silence returned. None of us mentioned it in the morning. We kept moving. Terrain worsened as the road faded into an overgrown trail. Fallen branches forced detours. Loose stones rolled underfoot. Progress slowed to a crawl. By midday, we found signs people had passed recently. Boot prints, discarded wrappers, a makeshift bandage tied around a tree branch. Survivors moving the same direction. Hope crept back cautiously. Where people gathered, there might be structure, information, maybe even organized defense. We followed the trail markers uphill until the forest opened suddenly onto a clearing. A fire tower rose above the trees, metal frame silhouetted against gray sky. Relief hit all of us at once. The tower stood quiet, ladder intact. Supplies scattered below suggested someone had used it recently but left in a hurry. We climbed carefully, one at a time. From the top, the world expanded. Miles of visibility in every direction. And for the first time since leaving the city, we saw infected clearly from distance. Small groups drifting through valleys far below, moving along roads like slow currents. Sparse compared to urban hordes, just as we'd hoped. Elevation mattered. We searched the tower thoroughly. Old emergency rations remained sealed in storage bins. Water collection barrels still half full. A radio unit powered by solar panels sat mounted against one wall. Luis managed to bring it online after nearly an hour of adjustments. Static filled the room. Then voices. Fragmented transmissions repeating emergency instructions, military call signs, scattered survivor chatter. Most signals weak or overlapping. One message repeated more clearly than others. Fallback coordination under Cinderfall. Designated research facilities maintaining containment, infection degradation observed over extended periods. We froze listening. Degradation. Carla leaned closer, adjusting frequency carefully. Infected cellular breakdown expected within months. Avoid high-density zones. Relocation to secured installations advised. The message looped again through static. Months, not forever. The infected weren't permanent threats, at least biologically. They would deteriorate eventually. The information changed something fundamental inside us. Survival no longer meant endless running. Time itself might become an ally. We stayed in the tower 2 nights to recover strength. Ate properly for the first time in days. Slept longer stretches knowing we could see threats approaching from miles away. It almost felt safe. Almost. On the second evening, another group arrived below. 3 survivors approaching cautiously, calling out before climbing. A married couple named Dana and Mark, and a younger man called Tyler. Exhausted, dehydrated, but alive. They'd come from a failed evacuation convoy. Said military vehicles escorted civilians toward what was rumored to be a secured research facility east of the mountains. Along the way, screening procedures broke down. One infected slipped through. The convoy collapsed within hours. Most didn't escape. They joined us in the tower, swelling our numbers to 7. More people meant shared work, but also more noise, more risk, more mouths to feed. Conversations grew longer at night. Debate returned, whether to remain isolated or pursue the rumored safe zone tied to the government broadcast. Hope argued for movement. Fear argued for staying hidden. We delayed deciding. The decision came sooner than expected. Tyler started coughing the next morning. At first it sounded like exhaustion, cold air, dehydration. But Carla watched him closely. Fever followed by afternoon. Sweating despite the chill. He insisted he wasn't bitten. We checked anyway. Nothing visible. Relief lasted only a few hours. Near sunset he became agitated, pacing the small tower room, breathing too fast. Confusion crept into his speech. Words repeating. Eyes unfocused. Carla's expression told us before she spoke. Neurological onset. Possible infection without visible bite. Maybe scratch contamination. Maybe exposure earlier than he realized. We moved him downstairs to isolate. He understood what was happening before we said it outright. Panic didn't come. Just quiet resignation. He asked us not to restrain him. Said if it happened, we should end it quickly. Night stretched endlessly as we waited. Around midnight, the change came violently. Screaming. Thrashing. Strength beyond reason. Evan held the door closed while Tyler slammed against it from inside, voice dissolving into animal sounds. No one wanted to be the one to act. Eventually the noise stopped on its own. Silence followed. Carla checked through the window first. Then she nodded once. Evan and I went inside together. It was fast. Necessary. Afterward we buried him near the tree line at dawn, marking the spot with stacked stones. Nobody said prayers. Words felt insufficient. That was the moment hope became complicated. If infection could hide unseen, none of us were guaranteed survival, no matter how careful we were. The tower no longer felt secure after that. We debated leaving all afternoon. The broadcast message replayed again through static. Research facilities, containment, degradation timelines. Structure still existed somewhere. Finally, we agreed. Staying meant waiting for supplies to run out. Moving meant risk, but also possibility. We packed at first light, leaving behind what we couldn't carry. Before descending the ladder, I looked out across the endless forest one last time. The world felt larger than ever, but also emptier. And as we began walking east again, 7 survivors moving quietly through the trees, I realized something had changed inside me. I wasn't hoping for rescue anymore. I was planning for survival. Traveling as 7 people slowed us immediately. Footsteps multiplied. Conversations drifted louder without anyone meaning them to. Every snap twig sounded amplified. We spread out instinctively along the trail, keeping distance while still maintaining sight of each other. Mark carried a hunting rifle with practiced ease, scanning tree lines constantly. Dana walked close behind him, conserving energy, her movements careful but determined. Tyler's absence lingered among us like unfinished conversation. No one filled the silence he left. We followed old forestry routes, descending briefly before climbing again toward higher ridges. The maps taken from the ranger station suggested an abandoned service road leading east toward older infrastructure. Dams, monitoring stations, research outposts built decades earlier and mostly forgotten. If the broadcast meant anything, facilities like those were our best chance. Weather turned colder as we moved deeper into elevation. Clouds pressed low against mountain peaks, trapping moisture that soaked clothing and slowed progress. Nights became harder. Sleep came in short bursts interrupted by cold and distant movement in the woods. The infected appeared rarely but unpredictably. One wandered into view late afternoon while we crossed a narrow valley. Alone, moving slowly, head twitching in irregular jerks. His clothes hung loose, body already thinning. We froze until it drifted past without noticing us. Carla whispered afterward that decomposition had clearly advanced. Skin graying, coordination worsening. Time was changing them. That knowledge didn't make encounters safer, only more surreal. Food became the next problem. Rations from the tower helped, but 7 people consumed supplies faster than expected. We began foraging carefully. Mark trapped a rabbit using wire scavenged from an old fence line. The act felt strange at first, returning to primitive survival while the modern world still technically existed somewhere beyond the mountains. Cooking the meat over a concealed fire that night lifted morale more than expected. Warm food reminded us we were still human. We talked more openly afterward. Dana described the convoy collapse in greater detail. Military escorts overwhelmed by civilians refusing screening procedures. Families hiding bitten relatives out of fear of separation. Infection spreading inside supposedly safe vehicles before anyone realized. Order failed not because soldiers stopped trying, but because fear made people lie. That realization stayed with me long after the fire died. Trust had become the most dangerous variable. 2 days into the hike, we reached evidence that others had traveled the same route recently. Abandoned campsites, empty water containers, footprints overlapping in mud. Some tracks headed east, others turned back. We didn't know why. The trail narrowed along a steep ravine where loose stones slid underfoot. Crossing required careful spacing. Halfway across, distant noise drifted upward, low, collective movement carried by wind. We climbed higher until the source revealed itself. A horde moving through the valley below. Hundreds at least. They flowed around obstacles like water, drawn toward something far west. Maybe lingering city noise, maybe survivors we'd never meet. From above they looked almost coordinated, a migration rather than chaos. We stayed silent until they passed beyond sight. That was the first moment we truly understood scale. Cities had produced numbers beyond imagination, and even scattered across wilderness they remained dangerous. We adjusted travel habits immediately after that. Earlier starts, longer observation stops, avoiding valleys whenever possible. The injury happened late in the afternoon during a descent through wet rock. Luis slipped. It happened quietly. A misstep, sudden fall, sharp crack as his leg struck stone. His scream echoed before he could stop it. We froze, listening for a response from the forest. Nothing came immediately. Carla examined him quickly. Fracture below the knee. Not compound, but bad enough he couldn't walk unassisted. Movement slowed to near impossibility after that. We built a crude splint using branches and cloth strips. Evan and Mark rotated supporting Luis while he leaned between them, trying not to put weight on the leg. Progress dropped to a fraction of earlier pace. Frustration crept into conversations. Not anger, just exhaustion meeting reality. Every hour exposed us longer to risk. Every delay increased chances of encountering infected or running out of food. Luis apologized repeatedly until Carla finally told him to stop talking and focus on breathing. Nobody blamed him, but fear settled deeper among us. That night we sheltered inside an abandoned forestry cabin half collapsed under snow damage from past winters. Walls still stood, roof mostly intact. Enough protection to rest properly. Rain intensified after dark, hammering would like distant gunfire. We allowed a slightly larger fire for warmth, blocking windows carefully to hide light. Steam rose from drying clothes while fatigue pulled everyone towards sleep. During my watch shift near dawn, I heard movement outside. Slow steps circling the cabin. I woke Evan silently. We listened together, scratching along exterior walls. Soft impacts against wood. More than one source. Through a narrow gap in boarded windows, I saw shapes moving in darkness. At least 5 infected drawn by scent or faint noise. They wandered aimlessly at first, bumping into walls, circling without coordination. We stayed perfectly still. Minutes stretched painfully long. One began striking the door repeatedly, not intelligently, just reacting to sound memory or instinct. The impacts grew louder. Luis stirred inside, groaning from pain. The infected reacted instantly. More bodies pressed toward the door. wood splintered slowly under repeated blows. Evan looked at me. No words needed. We couldn't let them breach. Mark positioned himself beside the door while I prepared to open it just enough. Timing mattered. Fast engagement, minimal noise afterward. On Evan's signal, we pulled the door inward and struck immediately. The confined space forced close combat. Tire iron, knife, crowbar. Controlled strikes aimed at skulls before they could push through. The smell hit hard, rot mixed with wet earth. It ended quickly but violently. We dragged bodies away from the entrance and waited, listening for more. None came. When dawn arrived, exhaustion weighed heavier than fear. The cabin floor stained dark reminded us how thin safety really was. Luis watched silently while we cleaned weapons in rainwater outside. He didn't apologize again. We resumed travel late that morning. Slower than ever but determined to keep moving east toward whatever remained of organized refuge. By afternoon the forest began thinning, terrain opening into higher plateaus dotted with old utility structures. Rusted signs marked restricted land boundaries, federal property long before collapse. Hope returned cautiously. Government installations meant infrastructure. Infrastructure meant possibility. As the sun lowered behind mountain ridges, we spotted fencing ahead through the trees. Tall, reinforced, partially collapsed in sections. Beyond it sat a cluster of low concrete buildings surrounded by overgrown access roads. An abandoned research facility, exactly the kind mentioned in the broadcast. We approached carefully, hearts beating faster not from fear alone but from the fragile belief that maybe, finally, we had reached somewhere built to survive what the world had become. The fence surrounding the facility had once been designed to keep people out. Now it looked like something had tried very hard to get in. Sections bent inward, wire torn loose, warning signs hanging crooked in the wind. Rust streaked the metal, but the damage was recent enough to unsettle all of us. We didn't rush forward. Evan circled wide with Mark to check the perimeter while the rest of us waited under tree cover. The buildings sat silent beyond cracked asphalt lots overtaken by weeds. No visible movement, no smoke, no lights. Silence again, always the worst sign. When they returned, Evan shook his head slowly. Multiple breaches in the fence, but no bodies outside. No obvious signs of recent activity either. We entered through a collapsed section, stepping carefully over twisted metal. The air inside felt different, still, contained. Concrete structures absorbed sound, making our footsteps dull and heavy. Faded government insignias marked the walls near the main entrance, paint peeling but still recognizable beneath dirt and weather. The doors stood open. Inside smelled stale but not rotten, dust, old paper, faint chemical residue. We moved room by room. Offices abandoned mid-use. Coffee mugs fossilized with dried residue. Computer monitors dark but intact. Papers scattered across floors suggested hurried evacuation rather than destruction. Luis leaned heavily on Evan as we advanced, his face pale from pain and exhaustion. Carla checked him constantly, adjusting the splint, rationing pain medication carefully. The deeper we moved into the facility, the clearer its purpose became. Laboratories, containment rooms, medical observation areas behind reinforced glass. Someone had studied the infection here. In a central operations room, solar backup systems still powered emergency lighting faintly glowing along corridors. A bank of servers hummed weakly, somehow still alive after weeks without maintenance. Luis sat immediately, overwhelmed, while Carla and I searched desks for information. We found it in printed binders labeled with the same name we'd heard through static broadcasts. Cinderfall Program, Biological Response Division. The documents were technical, dense with terminology, but certain words repeated clearly enough for anyone to understand. Neurological override, aggression loop, cellular degradation timeline, estimated functional decay, 3 to 8 months post-conversion. Carla read silently for a long time before speaking. They burn out, she said quietly. The body keeps moving, but systems fail over time. Muscles degrade, organs collapse. Eventually they stop. Not a cure, but an ending. The realization changed the emotional gravity of everything we'd endured. Survival wasn't about escaping forever. It was about lasting longer than the infection itself. Hope returned, fragile but real. We continued searching and discovered a secured medical wing deeper underground. Reinforced doors hung partially open, mechanisms forced during evacuation. Inside were quarantine rooms, many empty. One wasn't. A body lay inside, restrained to a bed frame. Uniform still intact, military medical staff. Skull crushed deliberately. A sidearm rested on the floor nearby. Self-termination protocol. No one spoke while we closed the door again. In the operations center, we finally powered on a functioning terminal using backup generators. It took nearly an hour of trial and error before Luis managed to access stored logs. Video entries appeared, scientists recording updates as containment deteriorated. A tired woman in a lab coat explained progression calmly despite visible exhaustion. Infection spread globally within days. Urban density accelerated collapse beyond predictive models. Government strategy shifted from containment to endurance. Fallback installations like this one were meant to continue research while society stabilized elsewhere. But stabilization never came. Final logs described evacuation orders after internal exposure risk rose too high. Personnel relocated east toward a fortified military safe zone. Coordinates partially corrupted but direction clear. East. Always east. Debate began immediately. Mark argued we should stay. The facility offered shelter, supplies, defensible structure. Dana agreed Luis couldn't travel far with his injury. Evan believed the evacuation destination might still function as a real settlement with medical care and long-term security. Carla remained undecided, weighing risk against sustainability. I listened more than I spoke. The facility felt safe but abandoned. Systems failing slowly. Supplies finite. Isolation absolute. Staying meant survival for now. Moving meant possibility later. The decision didn't come that night. We secured entrances, blocked corridors, and slept indoors for the first time in what felt like another lifetime. Solid walls removed constant tension from my shoulders. I slept deeply despite everything. Morning exposed the truth we'd avoided. Luis's leg worsened overnight. Swelling increased despite treatment. Infection risk rising from internal damage. Without proper medical intervention, he might lose the leg or worse. That changed the discussion. A functioning safe zone wasn't just hope anymore. It was necessity. We spent the day gathering everything useful. Preserved food stores, medical supplies, batteries, maps, and printed research documents Carla insisted on carrying. Knowledge had become survival equipment. While searching storage areas near the rear loading dock, Dana discovered signs we weren't alone. Fresh footprints in dust. Smaller than ours. Recent. We froze, listening. No immediate sound followed, but tension flooded back instantly. Another survivor or survivors had passed through recently, possibly watching us even now. We increased security rotations that night. Around midnight, faint movement echoed through lower corridors. Not infected, footsteps too controlled. Evan and I investigated slowly, flashlights off, following sound deeper into storage areas. We found nothing, but one of the supply crates we'd organized earlier had been opened again. 2 cans missing. Someone alive was nearby. They hadn't attacked, hadn't revealed themselves, just taken food and left. The realization unsettled me more than infected ever had. Humans moving unseen meant unpredictability, motives unknown. We returned to the group without pursuing. Morning brought a quiet agreement without formal vote. We would leave. The facility proved humanity still fought back once. The evacuation direction offered our only lead toward organized survival. We packed before dawn. As we exited through the broken fence, I looked back at the concrete buildings standing silent against the mountains. Research left unfinished. Answers buried in abandoned rooms. Proof that people had tried to understand what destroyed the world. We turned east again, carrying maps, medical supplies, and fragile belief that somewhere ahead, the last pieces of civilization might still be holding. Behind us, the facility disappeared into fog. Ahead waited distance, uncertainty, and whatever remained of the plan humanity had made when it realized it could no longer stop the dead, only outlast them. Leaving the facility felt heavier than leaving the city. In Seattle, we had fled panic. Here we walked away from knowledge, proof that people smarter and better equipped than us had tried to control the infection and failed anyway. The buildings disappeared behind trees within an hour, swallowed by fog and elevation, as if they had never existed. We followed the evacuation direction recorded in the Cinderfall files. Old service roads appeared intermittently, cracked but navigable on foot. Utility poles leaned at angles along ridgelines, wires sagging uselessly between them. Luis struggled more each day. The swelling in his leg forced frequent stops. Carla rationed antibiotics carefully, worried about infection setting in before we reached help. Evan and Mark alternated supporting him, but exhaustion showed in everyone's posture now. Movement had become a negotiation between urgency and survival. Weather shifted colder again. Wind carried the smell of early winter even though the season hadn't fully turned yet. Nights dropped below freezing. We layered clothing constantly, sleeping close together for warmth without mentioning how necessary it had become. The infected appeared less often at elevation, but signs of them remained. Disturbed ground, dried blood trails, occasional distant figures moving through valleys far below. Carla's theory seemed correct. Thinner populations meant fewer concentrations. Still dangerous, just not overwhelming. 3 days into travel after leaving the facility, we reached the remains of a small mountain town. The approach felt wrong immediately. Cars clustered near intersections. Storefront windows shattered outward. Smoke damage marked several buildings, but no active fires remained. Wind pushed loose signs back and forth, metal creaking in steady rhythm. We stopped at the edge to observe. No movement. Too quiet again. We entered cautiously, staying close to buildings for cover. Supplies scattered everywhere suggested evacuation had turned chaotic. Luggage abandoned, bicycles overturned, grocery carts frozen mid-street. Inside a pharmacy, we found valuable medication untouched. Carla nearly cried while packing antibiotics, painkillers, antiseptics. For the first time since Luis's injury, relief replaced fear in her expression. Hope felt tangible again. That illusion ended behind the grocery store. We heard voices, human voices, arguing loudly. Relief surged until we turned the corner. 3 men stood near a barricaded loading dock surrounded by supplies. Armed, dirty, alert in a way that immediately set them apart from frightened survivors. They aimed weapons before we could speak. The standoff lasted seconds that felt much longer. Evan raised his hands slowly. Mark lowered his rifle first to show intention. Words came carefully, measured. We explained we were passing through, not looking to take anything. The leader, a thin man with restless eyes, studied us like inventory rather than people. He asked about our supplies, asked where we came from, asked how many more traveled with us. Every question carried weight behind it. Something felt wrong. Dana noticed it too, her grip tightened subtly on Mark's sleeve. Eventually they allowed us to leave but watched closely while we backed away. No smiles, no shared relief, just calculation. Once out of sight we moved faster, tension replacing exhaustion. Human danger had officially joined infected danger. That night no one slept deeply. We set extra watch rotations, weapons within reach. The realization settled quietly among us. Civilization hadn't simply collapsed. It had fractured into unpredictable pieces. The next morning confirmed our fears. Tracks followed ours out of town. 3 sets. The same men. They kept distance, never revealing themselves fully, but signs were obvious to anyone paying attention. Broken branches. Movement glimpsed between trees. They were waiting for weakness. Luis slowed us enough to create opportunity. Debate broke out while hiking, whispered arguments about abandoning excess supplies, changing direction, or confronting them directly. None felt safe. Late afternoon solved the problem brutally. Gunshots echoed behind us, not aimed at us, at something else. Then screaming. Human, short-lived. We climbed a ridge and looked back carefully. A small group of infected moved through the trail below, drawn by the gunfire. We saw one of the armed men fall while the others fired wildly before disappearing into trees. The forest swallowed the sounds quickly. We didn't investigate. We kept moving. That night conversation remained minimal. Nobody celebrated. Survival had simply shifted outcomes without mercy. Luis's condition improved slightly with new medication, but walking remained painful. Progress stayed slow. 2 days later, terrain began descending gradually, forest thinning into rolling hills. Evidence of larger infrastructure appeared: old transmission towers, wider roads, abandoned maintenance vehicles. Signs pointed toward a larger settlement ahead. Energy returned to the group despite fatigue. If evacuation convoys had traveled this way, maybe we were close. Near sunset, we reached a ridge overlooking a broad valley. At its center stood a fortified town. Concrete barriers formed outer rings. Watchtowers visible along perimeter roads. Military vehicles abandoned but positioned intentionally. Smoke rose faintly from inside. Movement along walls. Alive. Actual organized survivors. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. We waited until morning to approach, signaling carefully from distance to avoid being mistaken for threats. As we moved closer, details sharpened. The defenses were damaged. Sections collapsed. Gate partially open. No guards responded to our calls. Unease replaced excitement. We entered slowly. Inside, silence greeted us again, but different from wilderness silence. Doors hung open. Barricades overturned. Supplies scattered across streets. Bodies lay where they'd fallen. Some human, some not fully human anymore. Signs of desperate fighting marked every building. Blood sprayed across walls. Shell casings everywhere. The safe zone had existed, and it had fallen. We searched carefully, clearing structures one at a time. A few infected remained trapped indoors, weakened but still dangerous. We eliminated them quietly. Evidence suggested collapse happened recently, maybe days before our arrival. Too late. Always just too late. Dana broke down first, grief, overwhelming exhaustion. Mark held her while staring at the ruined defenses like he needed to understand how something so prepared could still fail. Carla walked slowly through a medical tent, hands trembling slightly as she examined abandoned equipment. Luis sat on a curb, staring at nothing. Hope didn't disappear instantly. It drained slowly, like air leaving a punctured lung. We stayed overnight inside a fortified building, more out of necessity than belief. Walls still provided protection even if the dream attached to them had died. During my watch before dawn, realization settled quietly. There would be no rescue, no functioning government sanctuary waiting just beyond the horizon. Only scattered survivors trying to outlast something already burning itself out. Morning forced a decision none of us wanted. We couldn't stay. The town had failed once. Its size guaranteed future danger if wandering hordes arrived. We packed again, numbers reduced emotionally if not physically. As we left through broken gates, I stopped and looked back at the abandoned defenses stretching across the valley. Proof that preparation alone wasn't enough. We walked away without speaking, heading deeper into quieter land, no longer chasing promises of safety. Now we were searching for something smaller, something sustainable, somewhere we could survive without depending on a world that no longer existed. After the failed settlement, none of us talked about rescue anymore. The direction of travel changed without discussion. Instead of moving toward known locations or old evacuation routes, we began choosing paths that avoided them entirely. Smaller roads, higher ground, places unlikely to attract large groups of either infected or desperate survivors. Hope hadn't vanished, but it hardened into something quieter. Less expectation, more calculation. The valley behind us disappeared into fog by midday. Wind carried faint metallic smells from the ruined town long after it was out of sight. I realized I wasn't looking back anymore. Luis walked slightly stronger thanks to the medication, though every step still cost him effort. The improvement lifted morale just enough to keep us moving steadily. Carla monitored him constantly, adjusting pace whenever his breathing changed. We followed a river eastward, using water as both navigation and supply. The terrain opened into wide stretches of pine forest broken by rocky clearings. Animal tracks appeared frequently now, deer mostly, proof that nature continued without caring about human collapse. We began seeing fewer infected. Days passed with none at all, which felt almost unnatural after weeks of constant vigilance. The absence didn't relax us. It made us cautious in a different way. Complacency felt like a trap. Food became manageable again once Mark started fishing along calmer sections of the river. Smoke from small concealed fires rose only briefly at dusk, carefully hidden beneath tree cover. Routine formed slowly. Wake before sunrise. Move during daylight. Short rest periods. Silent camps. Survival became work instead of panic. Then Dana noticed smoke ahead one afternoon. Thin, controlled, rising vertically rather than spreading. Human fire. We froze immediately. No one rushed toward it. After what happened in the mountain town, strangers meant uncertainty. We approached cautiously from higher ground, observing before revealing ourselves. The smoke came from a small ranch tucked into a clearing near the river bend. Wooden fencing intact. Barn doors closed. Garden plots recently tended. Signs of life. We watched nearly an hour before seeing movement. An older man carrying firewood toward the house. Alone as far as we could tell. Evan and Mark debated approaching. Supplies were stable, but information mattered. Another survivor might know conditions beyond the mountains. Eventually we made contact carefully, hands visible, weapons lowered. The man introduced himself as Walter, former ranch owner who never evacuated because he believed distance would protect him. So far, he'd been right. He allowed us inside cautiously, eyes sharp despite his calm tone. The house smelled like real food. Vegetables, preserved meat, clean water boiling on a stove powered by propane tanks stacked neatly outside. Felt like stepping briefly back into the old world. Walter confirmed what we already suspected. Small groups of survivors scattered across rural areas were managing independently. Cities remained death zones. Larger settlements tended to collapse once numbers grew too high. Too much noise. Too much trust required. He hadn't seen organized military presence in weeks. We stayed 2 nights, trading labor for supplies and rest. Repairing fencing. Cutting wood. Reinforcing shutters. Work grounded us in ways constant travel never could. Luis improved significantly with rest. For a moment, staying there felt possible. But Walter refused additional residence gently but firmly. Resources balanced carefully for one person. More bodies meant long-term failure. We understood. Before leaving, he offered advice that stayed with me. Don't look for safety, he said. Build small enough that danger loses interest. We carried that sentence with us when we moved on. Terrain shifted again beyond the ranch, rising into rougher hills dotted with abandoned logging infrastructure. Rusted machinery sat frozen where operators must have fled. Gravel roads wound through dense forest toward higher elevations. Weather worsened quickly. Cold rain turned trails slick. Wind stronger at altitude cut through clothing. Nights demanded more fuel for warmth, forcing careful rationing of fire use. One evening, while crossing a narrow logging bridge over a deep ravine, disaster struck without warning. The wood beneath Dana gave way. A sharp crack echoed as a plank collapsed under her weight. She fell halfway through, legs dangling over open space. Mark grabbed her instantly, dropping his rifle as he pulled her upward. The noise carried far. Too far. We heard movement almost immediately from the forest below. Multiple infected drawn by the sound. They emerged between trees seconds later, climbing the slope faster than expected. Evan shouted for us to move. Mark hauled Dana free while I helped Luis across. Carla covered the rear with the knife, ready but visibly terrified. The infected reached the bridge as we cleared it. One lunged forward, fingers scraping Mark's jacket before he shoved it backward. The damaged planks slowed them just enough for us to reach the far side. Evan swung an axe taken from Walter's ranch, striking the support beam repeatedly. With splintered, the bridge collapsed partially, dropping several infected into the ravine while others stumbled back. We ran uphill without stopping. No formation, no conversation, just raw movement driven by survival. We didn't slow until darkness forced us to. Dana shook uncontrollably once adrenaline faded, repeating that she almost fell, almost didn't make it. Mark stayed beside her silently, hand never leaving her shoulder. That night felt different. Close calls were becoming normal, and normal was dangerous. 2 days later, we encountered another reminder of fragility. Mark developed a fever, first mild, easy to dismiss as exhaustion or cold exposure. But Carla watched carefully, fear hidden behind professional focus. We checked him thoroughly. No bites, no scratches. Still, tension filled every movement. Memories of Tyler returned instantly. We isolated Mark slightly during rest periods, a precaution nobody wanted but everyone accepted. Dana refused to leave his side despite quiet objections. The fever worsened overnight. Sweat soaked his clothes despite freezing air. He grew disoriented briefly before stabilizing again. Carla administered antibiotics, hoping infection came from exposure or untreated wound rather than the virus. We waited through the longest night yet. Morning arrived slowly. Mark's fever broke just before sunrise. Relief spread through the group like warmth returning after frost. Dana cried quietly while pretending she wasn't. But the incident changed us. We understood now that death didn't always arrive through infected teeth. Injury, illness, exposure, the old dangers had returned alongside the new. Survival required endurance in every form. As we continued east, terrain opened onto a wide plateau overlooking endless forest broken by distant mountains. Wind carried colder air, hinting at approaching winter. Supplies remained stable, group numbers unchanged. But emotionally, something shifted again. We weren't searching for civilization anymore. We were searching for permanence. A place small enough to defend, remote enough to ignore, strong enough to last. And somewhere beyond the next ridge, without knowing it yet, we were getting close to the place where running would finally stop. The plateau stretched farther than expected. A high open spine of land where wind never stopped moving. Trees thinned into scattered clusters, and old logging roads cut long straight lines across rolling ground. Visibility improved enough that we could see miles in every direction. That changed how we moved. No more constant fear of surprise attacks. Danger could be seen coming, human or infected, long before it reached us. For the first time since leaving the city, tension eased slightly from my shoulders. We followed one of the old roads north along the ridge, guided more by instinct than destination. Walter's words stayed in my head. Build small enough that danger loses interest. Late afternoon light revealed something ahead through the trees. A tall structure rising above the forest line. A fire tower, older than the one we'd passed weeks earlier. Taller, positioned at the highest point of the ridge. And beside it, partially hidden by trees, stood a cluster of cabins and equipment sheds. A logging camp. We stopped immediately and observed from distance. No smoke, no movement, no visible infected. The place looked abandoned long before the world ended. Weathered roofs, faded paint, equipment rusting in open yards. Isolation surrounded it on all sides. Steep slopes dropped away beyond the ridge, making approach difficult except from the road we stood on. Defensible, remote, small. Exactly what we had stopped hoping to find. We approached cautiously anyway. Cabins were empty but intact. Bunk beds still inside. Old wood stoves functional after minor cleaning. A rainwater collection system connected to storage tanks behind the main structure. The fire tower ladder remained solid. I climbed first. From the top, the world spread endlessly beneath me. Forests rolling toward distant mountains. No towns visible. No highways, no smoke columns, just wilderness, and scattered far below, tiny moving shapes drifting slowly through valleys. Infected, but few, so few compared to the cities. When I climbed down, everyone already understood without discussion. We had found it, not safety, but sustainability. We spent the first day securing buildings. Doors reinforced using lumber from storage sheds. Windows covered carefully to prevent light escape at night. Mark and Evan cleared nearby brush to improve sightlines. Carla organized medical supplies inside the largest cabin. Luis rested while mapping the surrounding terrain, marking water sources and escape paths with surprising focus. His legs still slowed him, but healing had begun properly. Routine formed quickly. Work replaced wandering. Purpose replaced uncertainty. 2 days after arrival, reality tested us. A small group of infected wandered onto the ridge, likely drawn by distant noise from our early construction work. 6 of them, moving unevenly but still dangerous. Instead of fleeing, we prepared. Mark positioned himself near a narrow choke point along the road while Evan and I waited behind reinforced fencing. Carla and Dana stayed ready with tools as backup. We engaged quietly, controlled strikes, one at a time. No panic. It ended within minutes. Breathing hard afterward, I realized something important. We hadn't survived by luck alone anymore. We were adapting. The camp worked. Days passed without major incident. We established watches from the fire tower, rotating shifts. Smoke from cooking fires dispersed safely due to constant wind. Fishing streams lay within walking distance. Game trails nearby offered hunting potential. For the first time, we planned weeks ahead instead of hours. Winter preparation became priority. Firewood stacked high, roofs patched, food rationing calculated carefully. Carla planted a small cold-weather garden using seeds found in abandoned stores weeks earlier. Life narrowed into manageable problems. Loss still followed us. Dana slipped while hauling timber one afternoon, striking her head against a support beam. The injury seemed minor at first, dizziness, nausea, but worsened overnight. Carla did everything possible, monitoring her constantly, but internal bleeding isn't something wilderness medicine can fix. Dana died quietly before morning. No infection, no violence, just the fragile limits of the human body. Mark didn't speak for 2 days afterward. He worked constantly instead, chopping wood long past exhaustion, repairing structures already secure, refusing rest until his hands bled through gloves. We buried her overlooking the valley at sunrise. Another stone marker among too many memories. Grief felt different now. Less shock. More weight carried forward. Weeks earlier, loss shattered momentum. Here, it became something we absorbed and continued moving with. Not because it hurt less, because stopping meant joining the dead. Time passed measured by routine instead of escape. Weather cooled steadily. Leaves yellowed and fell. Nights grew longer. Frost formed along cabin roofs each morning. From the tower, we watched infected below moving slower than before. Some stumbled frequently. Others simply collapsed and never rose again. Carla's reading of the research proved true. They were burning out, not all at once, but gradually. Humanity hadn't defeated the infection. Time was doing it instead. One evening near sunset, we spotted a lone survivor approaching along the ridge, cautious, exhausted, carrying almost nothing. We debated letting him approach for a long time before revealing ourselves. Walter's warning echoed in my mind. Small enough that danger loses interest. We shared food, directions, and supplies. But he continued on. We didn't expand. Not out of cruelty. Out of survival. The camp held 5 of us now. Then 4 after Dana. For felt sustainable. Anything larger risked repeating the failed town below. As days shortened toward winter, the world grew quieter. Gunshots no longer echoed from distant valleys. Smoke columns faded entirely. Even infected movement decreased noticeably. One morning I climbed the tower before sunrise and realized I hadn't heard human screaming in days. maybe weeks. The silence finally felt different. Not empty, stable. Tonight marks roughly a month since the city fell, though I stopped counting precisely. Time matters less here. Survival is measured in supplies stacked, traps checked, repairs completed. We are not rescued. There is no government convoy coming over the ridge. No radio message promising restoration. The world ended, and what remains is smaller, colder, and honest. We adapted. Evan manages defenses and hunting routes. Carla keeps medical records and studies the infection notes nightly, still trying to understand what changed humanity so quickly. Luis walks without assistance now, mapping territory farther each week. And me, I keep recording, because memory fades faster than buildings collapse. Tonight the wind moves through the trees below the tower, carrying only natural sounds. No sirens, no gunfire, no crowds, just quiet. We have enough food for winter if rationed carefully. Firewood stacked higher than the cabins. Water secured. Sightlines clear in every direction. The infected still exist out there, but fewer each day. They are no longer an unstoppable tide, just another danger to manage. I think about the city sometimes, the noise, the panic, the moment everything changed. It feels distant now, like remembering someone else's life. We didn't win. We endured. And maybe that's what survival was always meant to be. If anyone hears this recording someday, know this: the world didn't end all at once. It shrank, and the people who lived learned to shrink with it. This is Jack Ford, logging from the Ridge Camp. We're still here. We're still alive. And tomorrow we keep building.